For those that are unaware, the Potato.Tf servers within the Team Fortress 2 community is the premier place to play custom man vs. machine waves on new maps. If you've heard of things like Memes vs. Machines or Canteen Crasher, this is the place to play custom man vs. machine content. Link to everything related to their organization down in the description below. The people who run Potato.Tf have been gaining popularity over the last year as the events that they hold are incredibly organized, well thought out, and professionally done. So much so that one of the major moderators for Potato.Tf took a trip out to Valve, and after a tour, sat down and talked with Jill of the Team Fortress team for what is claimed to be 2 hours. Now, the conversation that they had was not directly recorded. According to the person who had the conversation, there was no recording devices in the vicinity. Instead, notes were taken, and after the conversation was had, a paraphrased question and answer document was posted up on the internet. What you are about to hear are my favorite questions and responses that were found within this conversation. However, this is just a small snippet of a much larger document. To be able to read the whole thing, I recommend checking out Potato.Tf yourself. All the links are down in the description below. How many people work on Team Fortress 2 on average of the past year, and what do they do for the game? The number of people working on TF2 changes daily. It can be as low as 2 or over a dozen people. The concept of a Team Fortress team is actually a misnomer. Basically, Valve has a giant pool of artists, level designers, sound engineers, programmers, and so on. They are allocated to each team according based to the project's needs, importance, and significance to the company. As an example, someone from the Team Fortress team went to the CSGO room to fix an issue with their Linux build bot being busted. Similarly, some of the CSGO team members helped create artwork for the Jungle Inferno update. Right now, the TF team could be investing time and effort into the upcoming Dota 2 International. What is Valve's current stance on community initiative update projects? Valve no longer accepts pre-made community projects for the game. Any existing pre-made project should be considered invalid. If Valve chooses to run a themed update, they will post an announcement of the theme and invite people to make maps and items for it. This is necessary since if they think of a theme, there's likely not enough pre-existing content to that theme to release in an update. So they have to give the community a heads up so the community can submit the properly themed content. If Valve chooses to run a generic content update, they will randomly pick maps and items and import them into the game, and there is no warning if this will happen. It just happens out of the blue. One good thing that comes out of this is creators should not feel pressured to join the big hyped community project. Every map is on equal footing regardless if it's part of a package or standalone. You still have freedom to create whatever you like and don't need to worry about Valve considering it any less worthy than a project-related map. Sometimes in an upcoming cosmetic crate, Valve may add items that were submitted 5+ years ago. As for why Valve decided to add those maps or items years later, some submissions didn't interest them or align with their vision at the time they were submitted, but now have changed their minds and think those submissions would be a great addition to the game. Just because your submission wasn't added in the most recent content update doesn't mean it will never be added. Aside from that, content creators should submit their work to the workshop to increase the pool of content that Valve can choose from to include to a future TF update. Valve plays a lot on community servers, including unofficial community map servers. They download maps from the workshop every now and then and internally playtest them to evaluate if they are worthy for inclusion of a game. The community consistently requests more transparency from the Team Fortress team, yet they never seem to do it. What makes transparent communication difficult? Valve once told something to a famous YouTuber, I will not name the person, and said YouTuber misunderstood what Valve said, created a video with their misunderstanding, which was watched by a ton of people, and spread a lot of false information which caused Valve a lot of unwanted pain. It's too difficult for them to reverse the damage that was done and correct the tons of misunderstandings caused. Even with that point aside, once you have a sufficiently large and diverse population size, you get people with all kinds of perspectives across the entire spectrum. In other words, the likelihood of people misrepresenting Valve's statements exponentially increases, and so does the number of misinterpretations that come from those statements. Valve also feels that if they become fully transparent, it's not ultimately what the community wants. Instead, most likely, people want to hear what they want to hear, and are unintentionally or unknowingly using "we want transparent communication" to disguise that as fact. That being said, Valve does read Reddit, Facepunch, emails, etc. to see what the community is talking about, so they do try and stay on top of matters. They, however, prefer the community talks out issues amongst themselves and do not want to get involved. Unlike all of us, Valve has a position of authority, so saying something would cause a whole spectrum of misinterpretations than everyone else saying the same thing. The biggest hazard with transparent communication is that people may think Valve is promising something. Valve does a lot of internal experimentation, and there is a lot of things in Team Fortress 2 debug build that have never made it to the release build. For example, the gas passer was in experimentation since 2016, and they benched the concept because the experimentation didn't seem to go the direction they liked. They would have opened a massive can of worms if they said, we're testing out a new pyro weapon in 2016 because people may think that new pyro weapon is coming soon. In short, they are more comfortable with being transparent when they are confident and final on certain decisions and uncomfortable on everything else. When in doubt, they err on the side of not commenting on anything. They've already made this mistake a few times when they said something with full transparency only to later backpedal on it. What's with the recent medals ban? Why put it in place? The medals situation is a mess that spiraled completely out of control. Originally, medals were primarily exclusive for competitive leagues and charity communities. Then, more people wanted to run community events and wanted medals for them, and Valve was fine with giving them medals. However, the requests started to exponentially increase, and adding in medals was consuming way too much of their time. In short, they were burning out and wanted to call a ceasefire to give themselves a break from the never-ending grind of importing medals. Currently, people who have medals in the game can reuse them with a new name and description. This works for almost all non-charity events because only a small fraction of people, usually less than 100, earn them. So if they were to rerun the event with the same medals, a new batch of people can come in and grab a copy of the old medals, and it's good as new to them. Why hasn't Man vs. Machine received a content update? Man vs. Machine is a small component of TF2, so it is not considered as important or high priority as the rest of the game, just like how TF2 isn't considered as important as other projects Valve has going on. Similarly, within the scope of TF2, MvM is not considered as important as the rest of the game. How do you prioritize bug reports and decide when to fix those bugs? TF2 has a lot of bugs, and Valve acknowledges that. First of all, the source engine is very old and it's based on Quake. There are some things in the engine that are seen as bugs to players, but are not, and are just disliked behaviors because that's just how the engine is working. Source 2 supposedly is much better at that, although it's not too helpful since they haven't released the SDK yet. Second, all games have bugs. All maps have bugs too. It's impossible to fix every single bug, and even if the TF team sat down and issued bug fix updates, it would take them a decade to fix every bug report submitted to them. Ultimately, most bugs are insignificant, and neither the TF team nor the majority of players care for them. Bugs generally are fixed either based on priority or whether they feel like fixing them. They generally prioritize security, exploit, and crash-related bugs the most, and then get to the rest of the bugs whenever they feel like it or are able to. Some bugs may be pretty bad, but are not fixed because it's hidden deep inside some of the more delicate engine logic. If they attempt to fix it, they may cause a million other regressions elsewhere in the game. There's a cost and benefit analysis on that part, and they may choose not to fix a bug to avoid bricking the rest of the game. Lastly, Valve is not aware of every single bug the community complains about. Occasionally, people complain about a bug, but nobody ever ends up sending a proper bug report to Valve. It's actually surprising how much noise people make in unofficial channels, yet never send noise directly to Valve. How does Valve decide when to release a TF2 update? A patch, not a major content update. This is somewhat arbitrary, and they really don't have any guidelines on when to issue an update. They decide on a case-by-case basis, but generally they wait on things until there's enough to ship. If there's a serious exploit or server crash or security bug, they will expedite the release of an update. How many hours do the TF team work on TF2 in a regular day? How about days when approaching a major update? Valve's hours are somewhat random. Due to the flexible nature of working at Valve, working hours can vary. Some people may work from 11 a.m. to 7 p.m., and some may do the regular 9 to 5. Unlike most companies, Valve does not measure employees' time in hours, but rather in employee productivity. They have to submit periodic reviews of their colleagues every now and then to ensure everyone is being an asset to the company. On days approaching a major update, the number of hours in a day can be higher than normal, especially after they release a big update and need to fix a bunch of bugs that came with that update. They usually compensate for that by taking a few days off after working crazy hours for days and days. What can the community do to make Team Fortress 2 better? The most important thing the community can do for Valve is to send them helpful and detailed feedback. The TF2 community is incredibly diverse, and each person has their own section in the game that they enjoy a lot. It is impossible for them to know every single thing that is a problem in the game, so they are relying on community feedback to stay up to date on issues. Some people make a lot of noise about certain problems with the game and assume that Valve already knows about it and doesn't care to address it. But the actual truth is Valve has absolutely no idea that that problem exists. Valve does their best to take into account how everyone plays their game before making changes, such as weapon rebalances, so they don't negatively affect one niche much too much. Of course, they realize that they sometimes make mistakes in their rebalances, and acknowledge that it's a difficult thing for them to get right. Note that while feedback is helpful, sometimes Valve may choose to not take any action because, of course, the emails they get don't necessarily represent every TF2 player. If every complaint submitted to Valve was addressed, TF2 would be a massive mess that nobody would enjoy playing, including the people who submitted said complaints. It's important to note that TF2 has between 30 and 50,000 concurrent players, yet they don't get 30 to 50,000 emails. So they are careful with what direction to take the game to avoid appeasing the vocal minority. Where is the heavy update? When is the next major TF2 update? There is nobody on this planet that knows when or if the next major TF2 update will ever come. Even the Team Fortress team doesn't know when it will happen. Valve has a lot of projects going on, including unannounced projects that may die before it leaves the drawing board. So the employees focus on the efforts that are most beneficial to the company at that time. TF2 is not one of those projects that's important to Valve right now, so any future TF2 update work is considered a low priority. Because of this, Valve can't tell anyone when or if the next update will happen. Valve said that if they had all the manpower in the world, they would happily push a content update every 3 months to TF2, even if it means the game becomes 50 gigs in size. However, they don't, because that's not how the company works. So they don't know when they will be able to get the next content update out, if ever. People think that because Valve has no managers, people can work on whatever they feel like. This isn't completely correct. Valve has no managers because everyone is technically a manager. If the Team Fortress team needs something done for their project, they have the right to go to the Dota or CSGO room and ask people to come and help. Likewise, people working on Dota and CSGO can ask the TF2 people to help on their projects. The next major content update may not even be the heavy update, but it could be a generic content update. Valve never promised when the heavy update would come. Just because they mentioned it somewhere very haphazardly, it doesn't mean that's the next thing to come. There could be 3 generic content updates before this mythical heavy update. No one knows, not even the TF team. That's how volatile Valve's project priorities are. It's very easy to read into that and be like, oh, well, they just don't care about TF2. They're so disorganized that TF2 is never going to get another update. They don't know when the next update is. That's not completely true. They don't know what the next released update is. They experiment with stuff all the time. They have ideas that at the time of creating said ideas are for the next major update. But 9 times out of 10, those ideas do not get to the point where it's releasable. So right now, the rumor is they're experimenting with space-themed content. That's likely what they've been experimenting with for a while, but that doesn't mean that when it comes time for them to release something, that's going to be what we're going to get. In fact, there's evidence of a major update that was canceled in mid-2018. They cancel stuff all the time. Right now, they're working on something. Right now, they have an idea of what their goals are. But in 2 weeks, 3 weeks, a month, 6 months, that might not be what their goals are anymore, and the stuff might just get put aside. That's not just how TF2 works, that's how everything works. Is the growing size of TF2 a factor in deciding when or how often to release updates? No, the file size of TF2 isn't considered an issue. As mentioned earlier, they don't mind if the game becomes 50 gigs in size. If they wanted to, they would release a content update as frequently as every 3 months, but because the company's priorities are elsewhere, they're not doing as much work for TF2. Old community maps may eventually be removed from the game to prevent the map cycle from becoming too large, which will help keep the file size down. They haven't thought that far yet because it hasn't really been an issue. What does it take to be hired by Valve to help work on projects? Valve is always hiring people. They invite people who have a skill set that would be a valuable asset to the company to send their resume. They would love to have more employees to get things done. Now, the types of people Valve are looking for are very similar to the types of people other big companies like Google and Facebook are looking for. So there's competition from both Valve's side and the applicant's side. There are a lot of people that say, there's no way Valve will hire a pleb like me, and Valve actually hates that attitude perspective applicants have. They think that a valuable candidate weeds themselves out with false notions. Valve prefers that everyone sends their resume and that they will decide if they are interested in you, instead of you self-screening yourself out. You also do not need a college degree to join Valve. Your portfolio should, however, include a bunch of high-profile, intellectually challenging projects, since that is what Valve cares the most about when evaluating an applicant. Naturally, only very few people have such qualifications, but those that do will be considered for a job offer at Valve regardless of their educational background or number of years of professional experience. Is the codebase actually a giant spaghetti mess like people claim it is? The developers try their best to take good care of the code bases in all their games. However, like I said earlier, the games have a long history of updates and is running on a very old engine. There are parts of the engine that are too fragile and scary to work with that they will not touch those parts even if there's a bug hiding in them. If you call those sections spaghetti, then yes, TF2 does have a lot of spaghetti in it. What is the TF team's makeup right now? How many developers, artists, level designers, etc.? Have there been any considerable changes to its makeup recently? In short, the company as a whole has a lot of developers, artists, level designers, and such, and they move around from project to project based on the project's needs and how important that project is to that person. One day, the TF team may have as many as 15 people. Another day, they may have 5. Does the TF team wish that they could hire more people to work for them? Valve will gladly hire more people provided that they can find the people who have the skill sets they need for their projects. There is a rumor spreading around that the TF team won't hire someone because the Dota 2 or CSGO teams will complain that they want more people. This is completely wrong and should be debunked. It is completely contrary to the way Valve works as a company. Valve is not some cool kids club that is impossible to get into. There's a high bar, yes, but it's not an exclusive circle. The kinds of people Valve wants in their company are hard to find, so that fact needs to be kept in mind. If the TF team does fully cut support for TF2, will they ever tell the community not to expect any more updates, or will they just let players sit in eternal anticipation for the next update? This is a bit of a loaded question, so it will get a loaded answer. They will let players sit in eternal anticipation for the next update. Like I said earlier, Valve employees keep moving around from different projects that the company has going on. Why would Valve want to declare TF2 permanently dead when it still makes them money? What if Valve comes up with an amazing idea that they want to implement for TF2 in the future? Valve doesn't know what they will be releasing in the next content update. They would love to if they could, but they can't because they have other, more important things the company is working on. Just like Valve won't promise an update or a timeline because they may later backpedal on it, similarly, Valve won't announce that TF2 development is over because they might backpedal on that too. The backpedaling works in both ways. So in short, yes, it means that the players will have to sit in eternal anticipation for the next update, but that doesn't always mean something negative. Okay, so now that you have all of that in mind, I want to say a few things. This was obviously part editorial. Not everything that was being said was an exact paraphrase of something that Jill said. Instead, it seems as if the person who was having this conversation interjected their own ideas and opinions inside of answers. And that's fine, because the majority of what's being said here is true to begin with. However, it seems as if this document takes a bit of a negative skew. The interesting thing about Valve is that they are capable of changing at any given moment, and if you're close to me or have been for a long time, you've likely heard me claim that Valve is changing for about 3 years now. However, externally, it doesn't seem like anything really has changed. I have a theory as to why things are changing and why the Team Fortress team, or whoever exactly works on Team Fortress, is being left in the dust. If you pay attention, the Counter-Strike Global Offensive team is incredibly active on Twitter and Instagram, and they released small content updates multiple times a month, and since last year they've released like 6 updates worth of major content updates little by little throughout the weeks. Underlords released in an early state, likely to be able to remain competitive with Teamfight Tactics, but what happened was Valve released a product before they originally planned on releasing it, and it went fine. The resulting communication and community-fed updates changed the game in a way that would not have changed it if we weren't there to be able to give feedback through the early development stages of this game. That and the Underlords Discord server is populated by Valve employees that communicate directly with the fans. And now you have the Dota 2 team gearing up for the International and releasing infographics weeks in advance, talking about exactly what will be happening in the future of that game. You have direct Twitter communication and incredibly thought out blog posts about the future of that game. It seems as if there has been a push in Valve to value publicly pushed communication and publicly shipped content, instead of internally shipped communication and internally shipped content. My theory is that the bonus system may have changed. Instead of giving bonuses based on what people think is internally the best idea, bonuses can be given out based on well-received public feedback for publicly shipped content. And it seems as if the only team that isn't following these orders is what is left of Team Fortress. Throughout this whole interview, it seems as if the team is very allergic to the idea of constant communication with the community. That likely stems from the fact that the Team Fortress team has very high standards on what should be shipped, based on their perceived high expectations of community wants. That, however, is an incredibly inaccurate and foggy depiction of what the community is actually wanting. If you take a look at what the Counter-Strike team has been doing for a year, consistent, minor updates every couple of weeks would be significantly better than waiting 2 years for communication to begin with. Plus, if you're shipping small things consistently, it is much easier to be able to communicate that stuff publicly, because if you backpedal on an idea, it's a much smaller piece of a larger pie, instead of just shipping the one pie once every 2 years. If you have any questions, if you're confused about anything, my DMs on Twitter are always open and my email is down in the description below. If you want to support these videos, my Patreon link is down in the description below, and thank you very much for watching. I'm Tyler McVicker. This is VNN. Have a good day. Adios. Oh shit, I just had an idea. Okay, imagine, like how Australians are unlocked in Man vs. Machine. Holy shit. How you have to, like, buy, like, a ticket, right? Imagine if you had comp tickets, and the comp tickets can be purchased or created with a specific amount of refined metal. And those comp tickets can lead to unusuals in the same way that the MVM tickets can lead to Australians, but you need to play competitive.